All right, today, yet again, I want to discuss the concept of game ownership. It's a topic I've frequently evaluated in the past from multiple different angles. The idea that you don't really own the games that you buy, and what little security of purchase existed previously is even being actively downsized every single day. But as is true with a lot of these forward looking topics, there was less of a concrete example and more of a speculative assumption. The progression itself has existed for a very long time. What started as physical discs became digital downloads. Digital downloads then became online only. And now, with cloud streaming, the concept of online only is being dialed up to the nth degree by making purchases, such as those executed on Google Stadia, an isolated ecosystem where server availability totally and fully dictates whether or not a user can access any of their games. To understand the full extent of this transformation, we need to define ownership when it comes to video games. A lot of comments on my past coverage focused on the word ownership as a literal definition. This is not the case. The same way you don't own the story when you buy a book, you don't own the game when you buy it, you don't own the concept of the game or the intellectual property or trademark, etc. You merely own an individual license to play that game. In the past, that license was effectively given in perpetuity. The nature of hardware was such that a game purchase became yours forever, or at least as long as you kept the disc or other hardware in working condition. Now, technically, this might not have been true, but short of kicking down your door and forcefully taking back the physical disc from your home, publishers weren't able to revoke access. This all changed when the concept of digital downloads became mainstream. Now, it's an appealing system, to be sure. The idea of being able to access your game library from multiple locations, being able to re-download games here or there without the physical disc to load everything. But with that flexibility and convenience came an increased reliance on high-speed internet, as well as a reduction in the amount of control a user had over their own individual license. Rather than the pretty much outlandish measure of physically coming to your home to extract your purchase, game publishers could now simply ban an account remotely, revoke a key, etc. This is largely speaking not a problem for everyday gamers. Most players just go about their day without receiving a ban, or participating in any sort of activity that should realistically lead to a ban. But just because the majority follow what appears to be a reasonable norm, it does not mean that every game or every publisher conform to that same expectation. An easy example is Fallout 76. Fallout 76 is a dumpster fire for 100 separate reasons. I won't even try to list them all, but one of the smaller and lesser discussed problems that the game had was its inability to cope with hackers, cheaters, and exploits. Over the span of a few months, reports became increasingly frequent that some players were being suspended, their accounts terminated, their access to a $60 purchase they had paid money for revoked, and all because of a ridiculous anti-cheating system that was misidentifying culprits based on trivial factors such as how many items they had in their inventory. This is a clear example of product revocation, which in this particular instance verifiably occurred more than once to the detriment of innocent players, and would not have been possible in the same way without an emphasis on digital-only purchases. Perhaps it's a bad example. Fallout 76 is an online-only multiplayer title, so account termination was always going to be a possibility, but to really demonstrate the trend, we should examine the most recent example. Tron Evolution is a hybrid single-player multiplayer video game based on the popular movie Tron Legacy. The game was released in 2010, and while it was by no means a blockbuster title, it saw decent popularity. Flash forward to today, and the game is no longer playable for certain buyers. Let me clarify here, the DRM protocols, DRM standing for Digital Rights Management, have expired, meaning that any player who owns the game but did not have it actively installed is now locked out of their purchase. To clarify something, the game was distributed on Steam, and Steam itself is a digital platform, which means it's yet another link in the chain between a buyer and the actual secure ability to play the game that they bought, but that's a whole separate thing. And games routinely get pulled from the Steam marketplace, the same way products get pulled from store shelves. It happens. But when games are traditionally pulled from Steam, they are still available to the previous buyers in their individual library. Just like when a toy gets pulled off of the shelf at Target, the version of that toy that you have at home doesn't just spontaneously combust. For Tron Evolution, that has changed. The game is no longer on the digital storefront, but also it is now locking out a large section of players who purchased the game previously because the anti-theft measures expired. DRM is already a controversial system. Denuvo, an industry leader in the DRM space, utilized this year for Borderlands 3, came under fire as it negatively impacted game performance. DRM in general is the practice of mitigating online piracy, and it's understandable on a very basic fundamental level, the desire to prevent theft, but in practice the measures taken have the exact opposite effect. Anti-piracy DRM protocols often lead to decreased performance, and now with Tron Legacy they can verifiably lead to the complete loss of a product that was previously paid for without warning for no controllable reason. On top of this, online piracy and cracked versions of these games are typically, relatively speaking, a superior product when compared directly to their protected counterparts. A cracked game can often avoid the now all too common online-only requirement. It can dodge the increased system load of DRM measures, and through a digital medium, cracked games illegally downloaded return to a more fundamental dependability, much like a physical disc once held, though the disc itself is no longer used. The physical manifestation of that game is whatever hard drive it is contained within. All of these problems, which are really only problems for the consumer, are manufactured. DRM, in conjunction with online-only products featuring digital downloads, seek to create an environment where individual players must purchase their own copy of a game, direct from the publisher, or direct from an outlet that has a contracted distribution agreement with the publisher, like GameStop, for example. This is an endeavor to curb the secondhand games market. In a peer-to-peer transaction, Little Timmy buys the game from Little Johnny after Little Johnny finished it, and the publisher gets nothing. The two players work out a deal where they each get to play the game and effectively split the cost by one paying the other half price when he's done. But the poor little multi-billion-dollar publisher gets stiffed. With digital downloads, heavy DRM protocols, and an online-only connection, Little Timmy and Little Johnny each have to buy the game, because the manufactured systems to reduce their control over the product worked. Here's a pretty personal example. A long time ago, I fell in love with a game called The Battle for Middle-earth. It was an RTS game about Lord of the Rings. I was very young, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I can't overstate that. I had my best friend over, named Colin, and we would play LAN matches against each other, but I only had the one disc, so me not having enough money to go get another copy, I figured out that if I started up the game on one computer and then took the disc out at a very specific time, I could go put the disc in the laptop and start the game over there. Effectively, me and Colin could each play matches against each other with just the one disc. We couldn't take the game home at the exact same time, but when he came over, we could use the physical product and play our favorite game together because of the value that that physical product had, and the versatility that it had as well. This is no longer possible. In the modern industry, that kind of purchase security and versatility has been eviscerated, going so far as to spontaneously revoke the full purchase of an existing product players paid good money for, just because the measures to stop others from getting their hands on it 8 or 9 years ago expired. Publishers like to frame this progression as a trade-off. You can't have the good without the bad. You can't have the product security or longevity if you want the convenience, the constant updates, the anti-cheat, the bug fixing, etc., etc. But that is a false dichotomy. The truth is that digital downloads could operate in the exact same way as a physical product. Once the purchase is made, the files are downloaded, and the only difference is that your own personal hard drive becomes the physical product, while all the beneficial convenience systems could still exist. But no, instead they create a maze of systems, a complex chain of interactions where when one fails, they all fail as all of these different companies involved attempt to harvest a slice of flesh from each consumer, and the process of buying a game becomes a demented version of consumer trust, which can all evaporate in a split second, thereby nullifying the money that you spent without notice or explanation. The end result is a system that all but encourages piracy, and to go even further, Google Stadia is the next evolution of this concept, which not only seeks to fully digitize game purchases, but also digitize the hardware itself. Setting aside the fact that Stadia is basically hot garbage with tons of other issues, picture this. Let's say 10 years ago, when you had an old PlayStation and a library full of games, that Sony decided to close up shop and cancel the PlayStation outright. Now, you may be thinking this is a bad analogy, but it really isn't because Google has canceled product lines and services many times in the past. So let's say it happens with Stadia. If Sony canceled the PlayStation like 10 years ago, you could still play everything you had on the system you already owned. If it broke, you could theoretically find someone to repair it. The responsibility rested on you as an owner to be responsible and protect your purchases. With Stadia, if Google shuts down, you lose everything. Everything instantly. The games you bought, gone. There is no hardware, so your subscription payments went towards what? Nothing, because they were given simply to maintain access to a bunch of things that you bought, the same way you buy a physical game disc, but didn't own, and you are in a similar situation to many users who purchased Tron Evolution. You paid money for nothing and can't do anything about it. If it had to be condensed down to a single sentence, it would be this. Video games went from being a product you purchase and can then play forever as long as you were responsible as an owner, to a temporary service you pay for just like everything else, but can be taken away from you at any time for any reason well and truly after the point of purchase without any repercussions. Tron Evolution is the latest and best example of how the industry is selling more for less and pretending that they are doing you a favor. It's honestly ridiculous. But that's it for today. If you want support, there are links down below, merch, Twitter, Patreon, etc., but I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching, and have a nice night.